Okay.
Okay.
Well, let me just introduce Sara briefly to everybody. Sara and I used to teach together. We only briefly, Sara, for about a year at Freeman. And Freeman is what's the best way of describing it? So just a sort of fairly straightforward, mixed, non-selective, now an academy in Hertfordshire. And I think, like many of us, Sara, you're the only teacher in the department. Sara is far too modest to say so, but Sara gets extremely good results teaching really, in a non-selective environment, starting in year 9, in fact, Sara, isn't it? So
Yeah.
fairly tight pressure of time there. Okay, Sara, over to you.
Okay. So what I think the main aim of today's talk was to have a look at the texts, mostly at some of the texts, with the idea of non-specialists to increase confidence analyzing literature. And we got that idea because I guess many of you are in the Facebook group. And I know that some people are more nervous about teaching these new selections. And obviously we haven't had any face-to-face inset this year. So we thought this could be a good idea, and I'll just see what I can do to help. And then this also was added in, it appears in the summary of what we are doing. I just feel we'll see how much time we have. Sorry, Will, can you move the next slide? Sorry, yeah. I have already started badly. So sorry, I'm a bit nervous. So yes, consider ways of engaging students with literature and ideas for exam preparation. I'm going to cover, if I have the time, very briefly, because I think, we may not be able to cover all of it, but to a certain extent.
It's very homemade, but very.
Sorry, is there a problem?
I don't think so, so I think it's all okay.
Okay, so it depends on how engaged we are ourselves. So my first list of recommendations, especially, Will, can you move on?
Yep.
Yeah, I'll try to say things properly. So it's a list of do's and teachers need to think. We need to think about each passage in a positive manner, because I think all of us, if we are under pressure, especially for time, we just have that list of chunks of Latin that we see as a duty, as a hurdle to go through. And the more we don't look at them like that and relax about them and enjoy them, the more we will engage the kids with them. We need to think what made the passage alive at the time. Not, we need to give ourselves a little bit of time to understand the passage, the language, how language is manipulated. And above all, one of the things I have learned on my years of teaching, especially for GCSE, is to keep things as simple as possible. And that links very much with the don'ts. So it's not a piece of unseen translation. That's very important for us to think, because the kids immediately look at another chunk of Latin as another difficult thing to translate. But it's not. The literature is not about getting every word perfect. It's about our overall engagement with a text. We also have to try, and this, I'm guilty of this all the time, try not to think of the text as a mechanical tool to find 3 or 4 points that the kids can make into their 6-mark question or similar. I think it's very important that we don't try to be over clever and sophisticated and think about all the rhetorical devices with difficult Greek words, names. So my starting point always when I'm preparing set text for literature, for GCSE, is try to keep all my analysis down as simple as possible for a group of 15 years old, not A-levels, not anything further. So that's kind of my general background to get started a bit. Next slide. Okay, so this is just, again, a very brief, that sounds a very stupid slide because you know what the set text are, but we always need to think about the writers, the passages. They are not just separate pieces of Latin without a personality. Each of the authors had its own style, lived in its own period. So for instance, I have separated there into prose and verse. We know that verse, very often we find it as more literature, it's easier to analyze. So for instance, if you have a little bit of time to prepare before you teach, I would start preparing the verse, even if I probably will start teaching the prose. Okay, if that makes sense. I'll come back to that in a minute. So, you know, the text of the Petronius text, we have to think of it in a way as a bit of a novel. He has built characters that are nouveau riche, telling stories without much of an education, and we have to try and make the kids understand that. It's completely different from the Suetonius or the Pliny, where we have writers which are highly educated, and they are writing, therefore it's going to be different. The same with the poets. Horace has a kind of light touch elegance. Virgil is the deepest half of them all. What I'm trying to say is each of those writers have a personality, and if we manage to understand a little bit of what they are trying to convey, then it will be easier for us first to analyze the text and then to pass that information to the kids. So they know they are not just simply analyzing Latin in general, but they are analyzing some very particular texts. Next slide. So I thought what I would do is do just some examples of what I do when I'm preparing literature, and also hopefully it will give you some ideas of things to do. And please, I don't know whether you are specialists or not, so I don't want at all to sound patronizing. If I'm saying things that are obvious, I apologize, but that's I'm trying to try my best. Okay, so passage, so this is the whole poem. So in a way it's easier for both us and the students to understand, because there is no before and after. Also because Marshall has a very strong personality, and it comes through his poems. So Marshall, if we know about him, he is someone who really likes humor. He is witty, and he likes criticizing others, and he likes making people laugh. The kids to get that idea that, you know, his poems are very short, they are very condensed, and very often what they are trying to do is to make others laugh at the expense of the person who is being focused on the text. So when I pick up this Marshall, obviously I translated it first. I didn't worry too much whether I got the grammar completely correct. I also used a translation, I used notes from CSCP, whatever. And then what I tend to do is I read the text and pick up in color things that I think just spring to mind. So the first thing I looked was at what I have highlighted in yellow. I mean, I personally am very visual, and I really like using colors. So the first thing that I saw is the use of personal pronouns and things that are possessive pronouns, things that are linked to me and you. So it's very obviously that he uses mihi and me in the first line, meum in the second line, mihi in the fourth line, and then we have also you. So we have here a dialogue, and it's putting Marshall at the very heart of this dialogue. Okay, we know what the story is about. He is talking about a friend who apparently is having dreams about him, about Marshall, is telling him all about it, and Marshall is trying to deal with those dreams through sacrifice, as you know, as they would do. The Romans were extremely superstitious, so what they would do is to try and like we do if we are superstitious, just to use the divine to deal with the problem of the dreams. Obviously, so that repetition of mihi and me and meum is making us think that everything is very personal to Marshall. Okay, and then he's having that conversation, and we have that narras is in the second person to us. So your nights are my problem, and then we have TB at the very end. So that's the first thing I would pick up on, and because it's very obvious, and I will discuss that with my students. The next thing I would think is what I know of Marshall. So Marshall likes, as I have said before, to have a laugh at his characters, and he's very satirical. And I think, well, one of the things that is very typical of satire is exaggeration. And, you know, I have been underlining in blue examples of exaggeration. So what is he saying to his friend? You are always telling me about your dreams that seem to be about me. And what have I done about it? So I'm drinking a lot, and I'm using up all my resources on trying to deal with it. Okay. So in line 3, he has that jam priorat facem sed haec win, that he has used up all his wine. And obviously, if we look at it in the context of Rome, everybody would have expected that the previous vintage is finished, the wine from last year, but the wine from this year should last into the next. But because Marshall is feeling so distressed, he says, all the wine is used up. So that's an example of exaggeration, in particular with the use of ad facem, which has that feeling that he has dragged it to the very, very bottom of what he would have. Now, also, I have highlighted the et, said ed haec vendimia, because that ed there is not an and, but a kind of adverb, and also. So it's emphasizing the fact that every single drop of wine has been finished. Now, obviously, we need to take that with a pinch of salt. Probably not all of it has it finished. So that's an example of exaggeration. If then we move to the 3 lines starting with consumpsi down to supersunt, what we have there is a list of the elements that are used for a sacrifice. So salsas molas turis, so he's using the grain that was sprinkled on an animal who was going to be sacrificed, and frankincense. And then there are the animals for sacrifice, the greges, which refers to the flocks, perhaps of cattle. Acna obviously refers to the sheep, and then porcus referring to pigs and birds and even eggs. So that's a very, he's making a list of all the things that he would use for sacrifice. So, for instance, I would then say to my students that the fact that he's making a list of elements in itself, that idea of listing of elements, is something that he's doing as an exaggeration to show how many things he's using up. So that could be another point I could make. But then if I look at each of them carefully, so if I look at each of the elements, we have verbs like decrevere, which are the idea of decreasing. So he's got a big flock, but he's going down slowly, because that's the implication as he's doing constant sacrifices. The same with the acna frequens, the adjective frequens, meaning the idea that regularly he's also felling his lamb. Okay, so that's, if you want the variation in the way he's referring to the different animals he could sacrifice. And then we have a list of 3, a tricolon, non porcus, non cortis avis, non ova supersunt. So that's, if you want, the final bit of his list where he's going into a kind of climax of how many animals he is sacrificing to the point that there is nothing left. And we have, so we in this moment of exaggeration, we have first of all a listing of things he's sacrificing. We have, for instance, the adjective frequens that have that idea of regularity, and then we have the tricolon that gives us a climatic idea of nothing left, not even eggs. Now, also in that line of the tricolon, we have the repetition of the non. Okay, so that's an anaphora, but if you don't want to teach your students difficult words, repetition is as good. So that repetition of non is exaggerating how many things he has sacrificed because of the problem his friend has. Okay, so that will give us two elements to comment on this Marshall: the idea of the me and the you, and the centrality of the me, and the idea of the strong exaggeration of sacrificing everything he has to try and sort out this problem. So that would be two ways of looking into the poem. Now, next, I have underlined in red a few words that I think also are important. The fact that he starts with the word semper is quite striking. He wants to emphasize, he wants to highlight that word semper is not so his friend or whoever has is not something that happens occasionally, is a constant pain on Marshall. So that semper there is very emphatic. We generally know that the first position in a line of verse and the last position in a line of verse are important places. They are emphatic places. So when a poem in those positions is for a reason. So you can see that all the verbs, well, not all, but a significant number of verbs like exorat, consumsi, and decrevere are at the beginning of the line, and cadit is pretty much at the beginning of its sentence. Cadit is before agna frequens, so we have verb followed by the subject instead of the normal word order will be subject verb. So that tells us that Marshall here wants to put an emphasis on those verbs. He really wants us to concentrate on the meaning of those verbs. So for instance, with the word consumsi, also with an I have finished, I have consumed, used that, all my grain, all my frankincense. In the same way, the flocks are decreasing. The idea of decreasing is the important thing. So he places it before the subject at the beginning. Cadit is also important. So it's those actions of the destruction of his property that he wants to emphasize. And that's why he moves the verbs to the beginning of the line or to the beginning of their sentence. So that already gives us about 4 things to discuss. And then I would discuss the final line, the punchline. So far, if we think a little bit about the context of this Marshall, probably what is going to happen is that the audience is not reading it. Probably the first presentation of this poem would be in a public reading. For all we know, Nasidianus is part of the audience, and he cannot see what is coming, okay? Nor can the audience. So we know he's having a go at someone who he refers to as you, but it's only in the very last line that the name appears. We can imagine that the audience suddenly will say, oh, it's you. If Nasidianus is in the audience, the word Nasidianus, the name, at the beginning, at the very last line of the poem is an important thing. He's done it on purpose. He's done it on purpose to maximize the surprise and the laugh and the criticism and the discomfort and embarrassment of Nasidianus. That's make it more by the fact that he's referring to him, he's given him a couple of orders. Vigila aut dormi. Vigila and dormi are imperatives. And those 2 imperatives are in a very kind of informal way of just telling Nasidianus to get lost in a way. And he finished with that word tibi, keep things for yourself, in complete contrast with the mihi at the beginning. So you tell things to me, please keep them to yourself. So that mihi and tibi in line 1 and in line 8 are framing the poem impact of the little poem. So probably, will I teach this next year? I haven't taught yet any of the literature as such. I won't go much more into things than this. There are many more things we could pick up, but I just don't think we should overload that. We should give the students sufficient to discuss in the poem, and I have not moved away from important. Whew. Next slide. Okay, so the next passage I have chosen is the Virgil. Can I stop a minute? Is it possible for me to know whether I'm going too quickly or too slowly?
It is. Does anybody want to say if I thought, Sara, that we could run through and then maybe do questions at the end, but maybe if people have got questions now, that would be on that previous piece. Yeah, anybody? Or are we all good? I can't see, I can only see a few people, but mainly getting nods. I think it's all good, Sara. Let's carry. If you're okay, do you need a drink of water or are you all right?
I could do. Would you mind to give me 1 minute, because I forgot to bring a glass of water, which is very stupid of me.
Yeah.
Just give me 1 sec.
Okay, okay. I can see there's some things in the chat. So what I thought we could do is, so there's a question here. Will this be recorded and slides shared? Yes. That is happening. So Hannah's making a recording of it now, and we'll put this up on the website. And I guess, I think Hannah said that we would put it on the main page where where we've got the links to booking in the first place. I think that's where the link to this will end up. And Clara, I could see you. I think maybe you're having some problems at your end, but I can see you taking photos of the screen. And feel free to do that, of course, but the presentation will go up as well. And I'm sure, Sara, it's okay for us to put this presentation up as a download as well, the PowerPoint separately from the recording. Okay, okay. I mean, I'm not teaching this at all this year, but loads coming out of it and really good level for the students. How do you feel about carrying on? Should we go on to Virgil?
Fine.
All right.
Yeah, I've got the Virgil. So for the Virgil, as you can see, if you have been looking at it, I have chosen the central bit because I thought in an hour, as there are so many passages we can cover, and this one is quite a nice whole. I mean, it makes a compact section. So also I wanted to use the contrast of Martial and Virgil because they are so different, although probably also the Virgil in contrast with the Ovid, both of them have the figure of a sorceress, a witch. And if you have already had a look at the text, you can see that the treatment of the figure of the witch in Ovid is very different from Virgil. So, I mean, the Romans thought of Virgil as the best of the Latin poets, and that has come to us. And, he's an extremely careful writer, and it's always a pleasure to do lit crit, if you want, this traditional literary analysis with Virgil, because he gives so much. As a kind of idea of when to teach, I tend to leave Virgil for the end because I have been trying to train the kids to be able to analyze things themselves instead of just taking notes from what I say. And very often Virgil is the one that allows them to do things independently because there is so much to discuss. And then they get that feeling of, yes, I can do it. I can independently say something about a piece of Latin literature. And I always find that Virgil is, if you want, the easiest at a superficial level for students to succeed and feel that they, that nice feeling of feeling that they have managed to conquer the literature to a certain extent. So in this piece of Virgil, so we know that this is from Aeneid 4. Aeneid 4 is the famous book where Aeneas goes to Carthage, and he spends a couple of years with Dido, or a year, and he seems to have forgotten everything about his mission. And eventually the gods remind him that he's not supposed to be having a good life in Carthage, but goes to Italy and carry on fighting and found a new city. So he decides to leave without telling, he's a bit of a coward, so he doesn't tell Dido on time. And she is obviously quite angry and also utterly destroyed, because she was where she is tricking all the Carthaginians, including his sister, to think that what she's trying to do is to call a sorceress to help her get rid of the love she feels for Aeneas and exorcise him, so to speak. But deep down, what she is organizing her own suicide. So unlike, for instance, the piece of Martial we have seen was a very critical, a bit nasty piece of writing, while the Virgil is completely different. So Dido is an utterly tragic character, and here we are going to the depth of her tragedy, and we are walking towards her very untimely and sad suicide. So we need to try and convey to the kids that this is a much deeper, much more serious, much more, if you want, beautiful and elevated and educated. It's in a completely different register. And so just before this line I have chosen is when we are told that Dido has prepared a kind of simulacrum, is a parody of a funeral. He has created a massive pyre in the center, in a courtyard which is in the middle of her palace, and there she has put all the things that Aeneas has left behind. She has and if you have read the book 4, we'll know that eventually that same pyre will be the place of her death. Immediately after that, we are told that there is this sorceress that is actually in charge of doing the incantation, if you want. So what these lines, the only thing we have is the description of the sorceress and what she does. So again, if you notice, I have used a lot of colors because I have again tried to say, well, if I'm reading this, what first of all calls me, and then what am I going to tell the kids? So I started reading, and the first thing I highlighted is the description of the priestess, crines effusa sacerdos. Okay, so first we have the stant arae circum et crines effusa sacerdos, and carries on. So we have a very short sentence, stant arae circum, which gives us a little bit of, and then the rest is all about the priestess. So the crines effusa sacerdos, first of all, occupies the second part of the line. So it gets like its own place for itself. So with those three words on the second part of the line really focus us on the priestess, and it gives us a very clear image of the priestess. The priestess has wild hair at this moment, crines effusa. So we know that normal, the expectation for a Roman woman is that it's going to be neatly dressed and her hair is going to be neatly done. So if the hair is all wild, that immediately is giving an image of we are going into a different world. And that's what we want when we are thinking of the idea of incantation and magic and so on. We are moving away from the normal reality into a world of the otherness of magic, and that's represented by the fact that the priestess herself looks wild. And then in blue, what I have highlighted is the 3 verbs of the 3 things she does. So we have quite a long passage of a number of lines, but actually we only have 3 actions from the priestess: tonat, sparserat, and quaeritur. Okay, so it's a little bit of a tricolon of actions. Okay. Then if we concentrate on the first one, that starts in ter and goes all the way to dianae. Okay, so sorry, see whether I can organize myself. So we have first the image of the priestess, and then we have the 3 actions. So that's going to give us, if you want, a structure for our analysis. So the first one, tonat. So we know the minute. The minute is that she is calling out. But tonat is also a word that, for instance, we can use of thunder. So it's that idea that it's a very strong voice. She, you know, in the middle of that quiet courtyard, the voice of the priestess resounds quite significantly. And that resounding is picked up by the alliteration of the T, which I have highlighted in red. Okay, and also I have highlighted the C of centum. We could also have it in chaos, because they are what we call plosive consonants. So the kind of consonant that we produce with a little implosion, and they are voiceless. So they are the most striking of the consonants. And the repetition of them in those 2 lines are picking up on the tone and the loudness of the goddess and the seriousness when she calls the gods of the underworld. Now, as an aside, I would say alliterations are easy to spot and difficult to explain. So I have only chosen them when we very clearly can say what the alliteration is doing, because sometimes it's simply nice and that doesn't give you a lot to say. So we have that strong alliteration there, and then we have the object. So who is she calling? She's calling a list of gods of the underworld: Erebum, Chaos, Hecate, and Diana. Okay, so there are 4 gods, but we have it in a list of 3 plus 1. So the first 3, Erebus, Chaos, and Hecate, are put together with the what we call the polysyndeton, which is the repetition of the conjunction 1. And so the que. Now that que is unnecessary, like it is for us in English. We don't need to say and, but it binds them together quite strongly, and also it gives that feeling that, you know, she is summoning every single god of the underworld. Okay, so Erebus and Chaos don't have an adjective, they are just put together. Hecate have the adjective tergeminam, which also gives it, you know, a very nice repetition of M's that makes the whole loud bass very well sounding, if you want. And so we have those 3 gods, and then we have the goddess of the virgin goddess of the 3 faces, Diana. Okay, which by being put again at the end, occupying the second half of the line, and by being not part of the que sequence, is become, if you want, the most important of all the goddess she is calling. So first, then we have the calling to the gods, then the magic starts, if you want. Okay, so she's sprinkling things. She's sprinkling a variety of things. First of all, so water, and he says water pretending to be from the sources of Avernus. Yeah, Will?
No, sorry.
Okay.
Nothing.
Sorry. So Avernus is a lake in Italy that the Romans thought was one of the entrance of the underworld. So obviously in Carthage, they are not probably have access to the water of Avernus, but is implying that is pretending that it to be. But by then we have another reference to the underworld. So we can talk about the different references to the underworld here, which is linking the fact that, yes, they are going to kind of metaphorically kill the love of Aeneas, but it's also making a very strong link with what is going to happen to Dido. And then the next 2 lines from Falcius to Veneni, we have a moment of pure magic, which is herbs. Okay, so the idea of you pick up magic herbs that are going to help with a potion, and I have used colors there to look at words that go together. So falcibus goes with ainis, mesai goes with pubentes herbae, and nigri goes with veneni. Now, if you highlight them in a color, you immediately see that the word order is very distorted. Okay. Now, obviously, Virgil has done that for a purpose. I mean, our students won't see that because they always feel that Latin word order is there just to make their life difficult. But we know that Virgil could have chosen to have the word order less distorted. So why has he done it? And, you know, he cannot tell us. So we have to do a bit of guessing. And that's part of what we do when we do literary analysis. Why has he done? What is he trying to bring us? So one of the things he may try and be doing is, in a way, picking up, mimicking a little bit the idea of magic words. We know from curses and so on that if you're trying to curse, to do a magic word, sometimes you put things backwards and forwards. You are using a word order that is not normal. I mean, remember at the beginning I was saying that image of the god of the priestess is a bit other with her wild hair and so on. So this is also a bit other. They are not normal herbs. There is not a normal sickle and so on. So falcibus and ainis are separate. Now, falcibus is the sickle she's using to gather her herbs, but what's so special about it is made of bronze. That must be something magic, something that the rest of us wouldn't do. And also, so the ainis comes at the end, and it, you know, when we have that very strong separation from beginning to end of the line, it creates an expectation as what's going to happen. So ainis is there emphasizing the fact that, you know, it's a special magic sickle. And also, if you notice, it frames the ad lunam. Okay, that idea of picking up the herbs and moonlight, not at any other time, because then perhaps they wouldn't be so powerful and all those things. Okay, and then we have pubentes herbae. Pubentes, that idea of the power at the beginning, but well separated from mesai. And then what's special about them? Again, that idea of poison. So you see again, nigri and veneni have been separated, and veneni occupies a similar position of ainis. Okay, which again makes the whole thing more powerful. And finally, we have the final verb, quaeritur. So she has called the gods. She has sprinkled a special water and special herbs, and finally she is she goes into something even more weird, which is the love charm. The word for love charm is amor, which again appears at the very end of its sentence. So we have quaeritur, the verb, at the beginning of the line, and what on earth is being quaeritur? Well, Virgil here is playing again with changing the subject and the object, normal word order. And this charm is also described as revulsus and praereptus. So you can see that there is it's elaborating on it, and it's really weird. It's something that is taken away from the forehead of a newly born colt, and before it's taken away from the mother. So that is a really weird thing. And that's what just goes into the complete bit of the magic. So in those lines, what we then get is a complete image of a sorceress who is doing things that are completely different from the sort of things that a normal Roman in a normal circumstances would do. So Virgil in these lines is taking us completely to the world of magic. Now, again, there will be many more things one could discuss from this passage. And, you know, I haven't looked in any particular detail at the comments from the support material from CSCP, but, you know, you can find that there will be other things there. You could make, if you're good at scanning Latin lines, there are other things you can say, but these things are what I would be saying to my students, because they are only doing GCSE, they are year 10, year 11, they're young, and I want them to be able to comment things in their own words. And I think this is a level of difficulty that they can deal with. And there's more than enough there to show that they have empathized, understood the text without going into complications that are more elevated. But I forgot to say that, like quaeritur comes before its verb, you could also, it's very easy for the students to comment on the fact that esparcerat comes also at the beginning of the verb. Okay. So, yeah, I think that's what I would say about this piece of Virgil. Again, should we stop a minute to see whether anybody wants to ask anything?
If you've got a quick question, let's pop it out there. Anybody?
Yeah, I've got a question. For the first reading, is this the sort of thing where you would provide a translation for the students on the first reading, or would you go through this with any degree of like translating it as a group?
No, I mean, yeah, because I'm only talking here about the literary analysis. I'm not talking what I would do before. I mean, I would read the passage before with them. I don't worry too much about giving them a translation, because I don't want them to, I mean, they have access to translation and they know where to get them, but I really don't want them to get bogged down on writing a translation, because that's not important for the exam.
Yeah.
I want to make sure they have understood, definitely, and then we will move to the literary analysis. So I would never start with this.
No.
Does this help?
That does. Yeah, I cleared up. Yes.
Yeah.
Great, thanks, Chris. Anybody else with a quick question now? Oh, sorry, go on.
Yeah, I struggle with it. Well, I say struggle. I'm not a Latin teacher initially. I'm used to reading things out in the language, but I don't feel very comfortable doing that in Latin. So do you think it's an issue? I mean, should I just read it as best I can and then discuss what the overall meaning is? Or is it important to read it with proper scanning?
I don't do proper scanning, to be honest, because I think with my Spanish background, I have an issue with long and short vowels. So I would never sound particularly good. I read it aloud for them because there is quite a lot they can find. But for instance, they can pick up the, I will read it, for instance, if I have something like an alliteration I want, like the tercentum tona toredeos, etc. That I will read for them. But it's not, I mean, I'm never going to sound as if I were Virgil. So if you don't feel very confident, just, or ask them to read a bit. If you have someone who, likes reading aloud a bit, but, just choose bits that you think are worth reading.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thanks, Mary. Thanks, Sarah. Shall we carry on to the next passage?
Yeah, there's a Pliny, a little bit. So Pliny tends to be to be honest, I have found this a particular boring piece of Pliny, so I apologize for that. But as it is the one we have to do, well, it's the one we have to do. Of Pliny, always look at Pliny whenever you have it with an open mind, because he is extremely rhetorical and very, very self-conscious of his writing. So there's always something that you're going to be able to pick up to discuss about word order, about any of the things that are good for him. So in this particular passage, he's talking about a dream that a man called Gaius Fannius had. He's writing about it in a letter to a friend, and the gist is that you should try not to finish everything that you have halfway done, just in case death picks you up before you finish. because that's what happened to Gaius Fannius. And Gaius Fannius saw it in a dream. So somehow he has to make that dream exciting. Okay. So again, when I read this first passage with certain dismay, as I said, I didn't like the passage that much. So we say, well, what can I find out here? And in a way, more important, first of all, these two verses, visus est sibi, so he had he had a vision of himself. So that could be interesting. He has that dream of himself, and he carries on per nocturnam quietem, through the quiet of the night. That's getting quite exciting. I feel the rest of the line is less exciting. He saw himself studying as it was his normal way, but he's building up by putting the verb at the beginning and telling us that he had a vision. He's building up a bit of excitement about what that dream was about. And then by solebat, he has created the setting. And then he carries on in the next way. Mox imaginatus est. So soon, that's a really quick word that tells us that something very quickly happened next. And he saw more things. First, he saw himself, and then the dream continued. So Pliny is just trying to wake up our interest, or the interest of his friends and in general of his audience, by putting those two verses at the beginning and said, yeah, he saw things, there were things that were important. And then the next one that becomes important is that it's obvious, you suddenly carry on reading and there are all these infinitives. So somehow 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, so you write 6 infinitives, so he's writing an indirect statement from the beginning. Why is he doing that? He could choose not to. Okay, it's a choice of the style that he has written the content of the dream in those few infinitives. And also, if you highlight them, you can see whether they are linked to long sentences, short sentences, whether they come at the beginning of their line, at the end of their line, and all those things are like that because Pliny has chosen them to be like that. So the first thing I would think is perhaps those infinitives make the telling of the story very, very quick. Okay, he wants, the real dream is not that exciting because Nero comes, reads a few books, and then goes. So to make it more exciting, he makes it a very quick action, like if it were full of action. When nisse, redice, promsisse, is as if lots of things are happening. So the infinitives are helping us with that very short staccato narrative that feels as if a lot of things were happening while Nero is there. Okay, so that's the first thing I would comment. The next thing I would comment to my student is that when nisse Neronem, again, we have that thing that we've seen again before, this little play with word order. Okay, that's something that Roman writers use very often, and students can really learn to incorporate that as part of their repertoire. So someone came, and it happened to be Nero. Now that's going to be a bit of a shock because after all, Nero, who already obviously was dead in the time of Pliny, was a fairly nasty emperor. So the fact that the nasty Nero came is just, giving us a little bit of spice to our dream. And then he did a variety of funny things. He sat down, and scrolled the book, read it completely, and then did the same with all of them, and he left. Okay. Now the book, we are told, was about Nero. Okay, about all the nasty things Nero had done. So the fact that he picked up the book and read it to the very end is meant to be spooky. Okay, because we have the ghost of Nero reading up till the very end a book that is there to criticize him. So if you notice the word order again, promsisse is at the beginning of its sentence and revolvisse is at the end. So it could, promsisse could equally stay there, but revolvisse could have come before eumque. Okay, that would have been a more following the word order better of the two, but they are framing the two key actions of reading the book. Then we are told in a much shorter way that he did the same with the second and third, and then the final one, tunc abisse, is very, very short. And that's again meant to be spooky because he hasn't done anything else. He has come, he has left, and what are we meant to make out of that? And then Pliny follow it by that expound. That's quite a strong verb, because the meaning of it is that Fannius was completely and utterly terrifying. And the verb come at the very beginning is, in fact, that's not only comes at the beginning, it's a sentence, the whole sentence is the verb, and it's the very first word. And it's just to tell us that Fannius was absolutely terrified with his dream. And then he made his interpretation, meaning that, you know, his life was going to be as long as his writing. So as far as Nero had gone into his writing in the dream, he wasn't going to write any further, and he was going to die. Now, how is that represented? Again, with the final sentence, tanquam idem sibi futurus es scribende finis, cufuisit illi legendi, et fuit idem. When you read that sentence, you, me, the students, what you have in your mind is that you notice there is a lot of repetition of words, but it's actually quite difficult just from reading them to see what's the point of them. And again, that's why I have used the colors, because that helps me to see the word order. So finis is the only word that is not repeating. The end, and finis is here acting in two ways. It has to refer to the finish of the writing and the finish of the reading. So we have finis, scribendi on its left and legendi on its right. So we can see how in the interpretation of the dream, Pliny has organized the words for us to see the centrality of the end of reading and the end, the end of reading and, I'll repeat again, the end of writing and the end of reading, okay? And then, framing that, we have sibi and illi. Sibi refers to Fannius and illi refers to Nero, okay? So what was the end of the reading for Nero? He got to the end of the third book, was the end of the writing for Fannius. He got at the end of the third book, and it was like that because then he died. Okay, so you can see that the words have been very carefully organized for maximizing the impact of the link between the dream and what really happens. And that goes back to that first sentence in the letter, that praesensit. Gaius actually knew what was going to happen to him because he was able to interpret this dream well, you know, exactly as it was. So that's the beginning. I mean, there is more to the Pliny. I haven't done the whole thing, but again, if you notice, I haven't used any particular rhetorical language. We haven't looked at things that are particularly difficult, but the students could very well answer a bit of literary criticism successfully and get good marks with this kind of interpretation without going into things that are more complicated. So these are the three passages I had. Any questions of these before I run out of time? Sorry, I may not have time for questions. Any questions now?
I think we're okay. Questions, anybody?
Yeah, hello, thank you for that. That was really, really enlightening, and it's nice to kind of see the things that you're doing. I think my main question about teaching set text in year 10 is, so I've just done that this year, is getting the students to feel confident in answering those questions. So absolutely, they are able to understand the literary notes when they've read them and when we've gone through them together, and they're also absolutely great at putting together 16 or 6 markers. What they're struggling with is kind of having that independence to comment on the text, even if they are given sort of leading questions. Have you had any recommendations for that?
I think sometimes what I do, I mean, if you go to the next slide, Will, I mean, that one is just a recap of what I have said. This is just remembering what I said to you, what we said to them. But the next one.
Next slide.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't written that much, but what I tend to do is do a little bit of a scaffolding So yeah, I mean, you've done all the things that I do, and we all have the same problems. But sometimes what I do, once I've done things myself, is try to concentrate, for instance, on one particular or two particular things they could discuss on. So for instance, if a passage has word order, that is like, you know, the change of the verb, the position of the verb, for instance. So I will do an exercise in which they only have to comment on the position of the verb and try to explain in their own words what they are finding with that. Okay. So not to try and give them too many things to comment in one go, because then they feel they cannot do it. I'll try to keep to some simple things that they are going to pick up quite quickly. So most of them will be able to talk about things like position of verbs, things like historic presence, if there are such things, you know, the verb could be in the past but is in the present, of things like listing, which they find, again, they can do without much problem, or repetition of quests and things like that. So I will organize my my lesson to make sure that once we've done some, I've given some, you know, I have told them how to do it, then I give them practice that I know they can do easily and start with those things. So in such a way that all the students have something they can comment, or of a flair, can find in their own words things that are more complicated. Does that make any sense or help in any way?
Definitely, thank you so much. I think like that point about giving them a really clear focus on one thing to look for, actually, that is, yeah, I need to really do that. Thank you.
Yeah, because I think the problem we have is that literary criticism becomes really worrying to all of us, and we think that they have to do very difficult things, but what they really need to show is that they have empathized at the GCSE level with the text, and that they can answer in their own words, which are GCSE words and not A-level or degree words, in what they understand about the text. And I think if we keep them to not very complicated facts, and we focus on a few and let them practice with those ones that they are going to feel familiar with, then from there we can build on a bit more sophistication.
Well, I'll just chip in as well, Ben, if you're using, or for anybody really in that situation, if you're using a reading course, have a think about whether any of these items and things that Sara's been talking about actually appear in some of the stories along the way in your course, because you just encourage the students from quite an early point to be aware of a change of word order or repetition or so on in their normal day-to-day reading. They'll find that transition to the literature at GCSE will be a little less, you know, of a step. Have we got other questions? Sorry, Sara.
No, the last thing I was going to say in this slide is that, you know, this is a bit more at the earlier level when we are reading the text with them. But if we manage for them to have a report with it, the text, so they decide whether they like, they will be able to explain the few things they are able to spot. Because after all, they don't need to spot much, but they need to be able to understand the text. And for instance, know that Marshall is really nasty. He's being really nasty to Nasidianus. How is that showing? And so if we need to try and create that liking or disliking of the text, the characters and so on, so they are more able to explain what they mean. Sorry, that was it.
Cool. Just to repeat as well that we'll pop Sara's PowerPoint up on the website as well, and send out a bit of information about where that all is. More questions?
Can I ask a question? So I understand all the bits about analysing the text and all the techniques and everything, but how, Sara, how when you first present the students with the text, how do you present it to them right from the beginning?
Well, that was kind of my last but one. It just depends. I normally give them a little booklet, and as I say in my slide, sometimes, for instance, and I know lots of people disagree with me on that, but if I feel that the text is very difficult for them, or I have students that are not engaging, I may read a translation with them. Okay, but not always do that, or I'll very often what I like doing is reading the passage as we read a normal piece of Latin. So I put it on the board and we look at it, you know, if I can click the word, so they don't think they are doing something extremely difficult, but they are doing the same as a reading from the Cambridge Latin course or something like that. So that they feel, they just feel, you know, that they are not going into the realm of the very, very difficult, but they're just doing something give them a series of content questions to make sure they nail down what's going on in the story. So I never start with the literature at all. I just start with a reading. And what I prefer doing is reading it as if it were any other story. And sometimes I give them, if I have it, I give them the word order. But to be honest, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But I tend to read it as a normal, as I would read a more complicated story of the Cambridge Latin course. And, you know, I will try to get them empathize with the characters in the same way, make them think of what's going on, go back to the sentence, and okay, in your own words, tell me what is happening, and that sort of thing. And if there is difficult grammar, I ignore it. We just go to the idea of them understanding the text. Does that help, Carenza?
Yes, thank you.
Very often the vocab is quite different, isn't it, in these pieces of literature? So you could start by just having it up on the screen and saying, you know, which items of vocab, which words do we think we've got a handle on, we've got a connection to. So at least they've got a starter, but even if it's only, you know, a few in the whole piece, there's a way in. Yeah, I will also look at the vocabulary, yes. I mean, it's suddenly, you know, from Spain, suddenly seeing myself in the classroom is not as simple as possible. But yeah, I mean, but what I try is to make them feel familiar with the text as opposed to unfamiliar. And therefore, I will also try and start with things that they are going to find easier. So like this time, probably, I haven't taught any of them, but I will probably start with the Petronius, because the story is similar to the one they saw in book 1 and they may be familiar with it. And also prose doesn't feel as other as verse. Or sometimes we can start with a Pliny, which is also quite straightforward. And what some teachers do, Carenza, is simplify the passage. It's a bit of work, but they sort of, you identify what the key parts are, you know, the nominative, accusative, verb, and then take out some of the other stuff to start with, so that actually you end up with a really simplified version of the overall story to start with, and then say, okay, well, now we've got that sort of simplified version, let's pop this, you know, you could do it line by line or whatever, now we'll pop this extra bit of information back in. It's not something that I've done, but I've seen other people doing that sort of thing from time to time.
Sorry, I just wanted to say something. Just what you said about finding a simplified version. On the Classics Library, they have a lovely simplified version of Petronius, the werewolf story. I don't know if anybody has seen that, and it's, you know, it's just purely content. It's, you know, it's very nice. But I just wanted to ask, would it be possible just to have maybe, Sarah, your list of things that we look out for when we're analysing the text?
Yeah, I mean, I can put that together. I haven't got a formal thing, but I can. If you put the kind of very simple things without going into really complicated words and whatever, what I normally would do with the students. I'll do it for during the next week and send it to Will so he can.
On that front, obviously there may well be more questions coming as it's not the end, but just to say, you know, thanks, Sarah, for putting all of this together, and that, you know, we did this because we were chatting, weren't we, one morning, thinking, oh, it would be probably, some people are after a bit of support and it would be a useful thing to do. Putting these sorts of sessions together is a lot of work for Sara, obviously, but for us at our end to just say, look, we're going to run a get together at this time, sign up. It's actually fairly straightforward. So if there are others of us who think, oh, actually, I could probably do a little presentation on this passage, or talk about this is what I do with this thing, feel free to just drop us a line, and we can easily just sort of send a message out saying, okay, you know, thanks very much to this teacher who's going to do this thing at this time, and people who want to, you know, drop in on it. So it doesn't have to be anything particularly formal.
Could I just ask, where can you find the simplified Petronius story? Whoever said that.
Sorry, yes, I found it on the Classics Library, but our school, I made an exam for remote learning based on that, because we had already done the Petronius story, you know, and I wanted a really simple version for online exams, so I could maybe find it on my iPad. On Google Forms. I don't know if your students have ever used Google Forms, but
yeah, that would be fabulous.
It's a simplified exam, and it was just to reinforce what they had done before lockdown. So that's why they did an exam in it. So
that would be great. Thank you.
Okay.
And just to see, if you haven't seen in the chat, thanks Liz for putting up Liz has put up a link to the ARLT website where there is some there are some more resources. I think, Liz, is what you've put there to help with the literature. So if you guys have a look in the chat, if you haven't done that already, there's a link, arlt.co.uk/teachers.html.
Hello, yes, hi Will. Sara, I've loved every minute of that, so useful. Last week we ran ARLT on Zoom, and we had an option group, so on the Eduqas new description. So lots of people have contributed resources as well as mine, and many I see are here today.
Fantastic, thanks Liz. Do we have any other questions? No? Oh, Hannah, was that you?
Yeah, I just had a question about how much you go into the authors and the kind of context of the literature. Obviously, you talked about like Marshall's funny and stuff like that. I don't know how the students find it useful with the passages. Or...
I just tell them a bit of the context and a little bit and the style. So I tell them a bit, for instance, about Ovid and how he wrote the kind of love poetry that at the time was frowned upon, and how, you know, he basically takes the mickey out of everything and eventually ended up in exile. I tell them a little bit about how, you know, Virgil poetry was kind of much more heroic, etc. So I tell them enough for them to see that, I mean, with Marshall, I could just give them a different example. So I wouldn't use, say, I use a little bit of a lesson, because let's face, all of us are short of time, but I always try to make sure they understand the difference between the different poets, because otherwise for them it's just another piece of Latin, which is like another hill to conquer, with the teacher pushing till they get to the top. And I just want them to feel that they can do a little bit of the walking by themselves. So, you know, I'll just tell them a little bit, enough for them to understand that, you know, there are different personalities, different styles, and that shows in what they are reading. I mean, for instance, with Pliny, if you have taught Pliny before, if you taught the day at the races, I'm sure every single one, a student thought, oh, what's wrong with that man? He's so pompous, he's such a snob. So we want them to get that feeling. We want them to cringe with some things, enjoy others, etc.
Cool.
Great. Any other questions, anybody? No, we're all good. Excellent. Sara, thanks. You probably haven't seen, but lots of comments in really helpful, and so on. So I think from everybody, thanks very much for putting all that together during your holidays. And like I say, if anybody else is up for saying, actually, you know, I don't see anybody nodding right now, but if anybody is up for saying, would you, Julie, you might be up for something like that, fantastic. Drop us a line. And, you know, we can say, okay, you know, someone's happy to take this passage. And even if it's just 20 minutes, half an hour, whatever, it doesn't have to be a full hour, does it? We can all just drop in at a particular time. So great. Okay, well, thanks. We've got a few other sessions happening over the next few weeks about various different bits and pieces. So probably see some of you again then. But mainly thanks very much, everyone, for sort of, you know, tuning in, I don't know, whatever it is. And many thanks, Sarah, for putting all that together. Fantastic.
Okay, I hope it was useful. Bye.
Great. Cheers. I'll just turn it all off. Cheers, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.